Hello, everyone. I welcome you to this episode of Grief Talk, where I have a special guest, Dave Roberts, with me here. We welcome you to the show, Dave. How are you?
I am very, very well, my ear. How are you today?
I am good. Thank you so much. So, Dave, could you start by introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your journey as a teacher, podcaster, and an author?
Absolutely. My name is Dave Roberts. I have a master's degree in social work. I'm also a licensed master social worker. Um, Prior to getting into my journey as a teacher, podcaster, and author, I just want to just let the audience know just a little bit of additional background. I was an addictions counselor and as clinical supervisor for 27 years in a New York State run facility. And I started teaching concurrently with my career as an addictions professional. And that kind of my role as a teacher, my beginning as a teacher, kind of intermeshed with the worst tragedy of my life. And I know we're going to be getting to that shortly. Um, I've been a teacher for 22 years at Utica University. Among the courses I teach are death, dying, and bereavement. I also teach a couple of psychology courses to art students at the Pratt Munson School of Art. As far as becoming an author, my venture into writing began as a result of trying to be of service and share, share revelations from my own journey, again, with the worst tragedy of my life. And I started writing for online publications, including the Huffington Post, Medium, and other grief related online publications to try to chronicle my journey and to try to provide some hope and inspiration to those who were grieving catastrophic losses. And then from there, um, I ended up co-authoring a book with a very good friend and mentor of mine, Reverend Patty Farino, and I know we're going to be getting into that, later in the program. But interestingly, when I started teaching was about 6 weeks prior to the transition or death of a very valued family member that put me on the journey that I'm on now, put me on the path that I'm on now. And from looking back, I needed to have that Utica University community in place when it was, because they were one of my sources of inspiration and hope that helped me move through grief, in addition to everything else. So that's kind of a very encapsulated version of my year of my journey to date. And as far as the podcast goes, that came as an outgrowth, I believe, of the service work that I was doing as a teacher and in other areas. Um, the podcast is a Teaching Journeys podcast, and it was actually inspired by two very persistent students who insisted that I need to do a podcast to bring the lessons from the classroom, specifically with death, dying, and bereavement, into the podcast world. And they inspired me to the point where we launched the podcast on March 31st, 2023, and we're 160 plus episodes strong right now.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. That's quite a journey that you've been on, Dave. So, can you let in a little bit more about what you're talking about, who you're referring to, who you have lost?
Well, first of all, I want to let your audience know, my ear, that I'm no stranger to grief, no stranger to the loss. I've experienced grief. I've danced with grief since I've been 5 years old. The first loss I had was my father leaving me at 5 years old to have my mother raise me as an only child. I never saw my father again after he left and found out that when I was age 14 that he died in a car accident at the age of 11. And there were other associated losses. I had, my mother transitioned or passed on or died, however you conceptualize death, in 1994. Prior to that, the maternal grandmother and aunt that I had, he had helped raise me. They also had transitioned. So everybody that was responsible for giving me the values and making me the person who I am just died. I've transitioned pets. I've lost a dear friend and mentor in the work world to cancer. But the loss that really caused me to reevaluate everything that I stood for, my values, my priorities, and um, my beliefs was the transition of my 18-year-old daughter, Jeannine, on March 1st, 2003, of a very rare form of cancer. And she transitioned 10 months after giving birth to her first and only child, Brianna. At 47, my version of a midlife crisis was trying to figure out what type of a person I wanted to be, the type of the world that I could envision for myself without the physical presence of my daughter. And I will say that all the training that I had, my education, my previous experience working with individuals who were addicted and experiencing other forms of trauma did not even begin to help me address what I need, what was in front of me. And so that was the loss that caused me to dive deep into the field of death, dying, and bereavement, and put me on the path that I'm on now, which was one of service and just re-engaging in life with purpose.
Very sorry to hear about the losses that you have faced, Dave. So that brings me to ask you, what do you think is the hardest part of integrating this loss, especially that of your daughters, into your life?
Well, I think the hardest part of integrating loss is that I think a couple of different things is that you can't first integrate the loss without feeling the emotions that go with it. I think we have to feel everything that goes with the grief journey. We have to feel the pain. We have to work through the pain, even if it teaches us that we can survive. And I think we have to learn how to survive before we can thrive. And that involves not suppressing the pain, but it involves experiencing that. The other part of problem, I think, with integration with grief is the expectations that society and Western society has had about grief for a long time. That grief should be time limited, that after 6 months to a year, you should, be able to stop grieving, put your grief in a little box, put that aside, and move on with life as if everything is normal. And that's the furthest thing from the truth. Grief is not time limited, it's circular. Any loss that we experience, whether it's a pet, whether it's a loved one, a sibling, a parent, a husband, wife, it changes the landscape of our life. It changes who we are. Every loss causes us to reevaluate our place in the world. And the fact is that, you don't, if you've had a 25-year marriage or 25-year relationship with somebody, you're just not gonna stop after a year and just say, okay, I'm gonna move on. There's going to be certain milestone events that are going to occur. The first wedding without that loved one, the first graduation ceremony that one of your children go through, all of that causes us to re-experience the shadow grief or the pain of grief that we experienced early on. But it's also a normative part of the process. Grief will continue for the rest of our life. We will experience the yearning for the physical presence of our loved ones. But as we move forward in our grief, as more time passes, and as we've integrated more tools, or we've put more tools in our toolbox, we learn to manage it more effectively. It never goes away. It just becomes more manageable and softer.
What you just said, it makes a lot of sense because many people I see, they struggle with the idea of moving on or moving forward. So, how would you explain the difference of moving on and transforming the relationship with someone who has died?
Moving on, Meyer, to me, implies that we have to move on and forget. And that, again, I think accompanies the linear perspective of grief that, grief is time limited and should be done in a prescribed period of time. So moving on implies forgetting, transforming the relationship involves remembering and also developing a continued bonds with our loved ones that will allow us to integrate not only our grief, but integrate the best parts of our loved one into who we are so that we are moving through grief with our loved ones as our joint partner and um, just being able to re-engage in life with them very much integrated into who we are. And when we integrate the best parts of our loved ones into our own life narrative, that changes our life narrative. That changes who we are and it changes our story. And our story is ever evolving anyway. But the process of integration I think allows us to rewrite our narrative in a way that reflects the reality and reflects our commitment to re-engaging in life with meaning and purpose.
Okay, so you have also co-authored a book named When the Psychology Professor Meets the Minister. So could you share how that book speaks to grief, spirituality, and healing?
Well, one of the things is that this book came about. I'm just going to just give you the short condensed version. Came about through pure serendipity or divine intervention. I met an interfaith minister um, under the most extraordinary of circumstances by the name of Patty Farino. And Reverend Farino, 7 years after my daughter transitioned, facilitated a spiritually transformative experience that allowed me to find peace with my daughter Jeannine's transition and convinced me that the survival of consciousness is real. So, but this book was about a 10-year process. I kept in the 10 years, and we have, and since our, we still have, obviously, still have a relationship. And in the 10 years immediately following that experience, we had a lot of marathon conversations about how psychology and spirituality could integrate to help individuals find peace after loss. I kept saying, Patty, we really ought to write a book to let people know what you did for me, to let people know what we've discovered through our conversations. And finally, a year before the pandemic hit, she agreed. So we wrote the book and published it on March 1st, 2021, or rolled it out on March 1st, 2021. And how it speaks to grief, I think one of the things we talk about is the process of transformation of grief, the process of transforming that relationship, that it is not an abnormal part of the grief process, but in fact a normal part of the grief process. And the other part that I think I want we want people to understand, in addition to normalizing the grief process, is that the work that we do to redefine our perspective with the worst tragedy of our life, whatever that may be, can also lead to healing in other areas of our life. Like, for example, for me, the work that I did with Patty to redefine my perspective about loss and to find peace with loss not only helped me find peace with my daughter Jeannine's passing, but also helped me find peace with my father's decision to abandon me and my mother's and the anger that I had at my mother for overprotecting me after he left. Because of the work that I did with Patty and other spiritual teachers, I was able to come to an understanding that my father left not because he didn't love me, but because he did, and that his history did not allow him to stay in a traditional marriage. His history, his generational family history was characterized by addiction, mental illness, infidelity with the male members, and when emotional attachment was asked of the males in that family, they would just take off and leave. So I understood that. I had context, and I realized that he left because he loved me, not because he didn't love me. And my mother's decision to overprotect me was out of fear that she was going to lose me, fear that my father was going to take me. But also, I came to an understanding through um, a meeting with a shamanistic, holistic practitioner that perhaps in another lifetime, my mother had lost me. I had died in another lifetime, and she wasn't there to protect me. And I was able to the put those events together and say I had a sacred understanding of why my mother was as overprotective in this lifetime as she was before because she couldn't protect me in another lifetime. So all of the spiritual understanding that I got through my work with Patty translated into ancestral healing and peace in other areas of my life that I previously had trouble reconciling.
How would you say that transforming our relationship with grief, it can transform our relationships with the living?
I think I think if we transform our relationships, integrate the best parts of our loved ones into who we are, it it gives us, I think, a type of energy to re-engage, to connect with community. And I think it renews our interest in life, albeit probably in areas that we never thought we would have an interest in. Like if you told me over 22 years ago that I would be teaching a death, dying, and bereavement course, that I'd be on a podcast talking about my spiritual transformation after loss. I would have looked at you, and as an addictions counselor, I would have probably had you take a rapid drug test because I would have said, "Where's this coming from?" I think it gives us hope. It gives us moving forward with our loved ones. We are motivated to connect with community, to be of service, to give, to help others. And I think it also shatters the traditional myths that individuals have had about grief. I tell individuals, I mean, there's no right or wrong way to grieve. Um, Follow your heart, look at your journey from your own eyes, and do what you feel is best to transform that relationship, to move through grief. As long as what you're doing is not hurting yourself or somebody else, it's all good. It does not matter what anybody else thinks of your journey. It's how you see yourself and see yourself through your own eyes, particularly during grief, and not through the eyes of somebody else whose perceptions might be different, and rightfully so, based on their own unique belief system.
So, what would you say is the misconception that you see most often around grief or grieving people?
I think one is that long-term grief, if you're still grieving your loved one after a year, that it's abnormal or pathological, and that's far from the truth. We grieve the loss of our relationships to an extent for the entirety of our lifetime. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you're not going to shut down the memories of a 25-year relationship or longer, or even a 10-year relationship in a year. Things are going to happen that are going to remind us that our loved ones are not physically present. So, I mean, the misconception is that grief is linear and not circular. And the other thing is that transforming the relationship is abnormal. I mean, there's some belief systems, I think some religions that may say, you don't mess with the dead, you don't do that. Um, you just leave the dead be. But you know, there's there's the emphasis now is on connection and staying connected and transformation and integration rather than just forgetting. So I mean, those are the two big misconceptions. And there's nothing pathological about missing your loved ones for the rest of your life, considering that there are going to be other events that are going to remind you that they're not there. And it's normal to grieve that and to yearn for them, their presence.
What do you think is one gentle step that they can take towards integration rather than resistance?
One, I think, is be kind to yourself. The second is that realize that progress is in baby steps and it might not always be linear, but be kind to yourself and do little things like, I mean, people have told me they've talked to their loved ones. They have they've talked to their loved ones. They have talked to them at cemeteries. They've talked to them through prayer. They have created, certain bonding activities like, lighting incense, listening to their favorite music. So whatever you need to do that's going to be, I guess, that you're capable of handling wherever you are in your grief, you do that. And then as you become more stronger, as you become, I think, more oriented to living a life that, right, accepting that your loved one's not going to be physically present in your life, then your rituals can and your activities can maybe be a little bit more defined. Do what you can do to maintain connection based on the energy levels that you have at any time during your grief.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dave, for sharing your wisdom today. And for those who want to learn more from you, connect with your work, or listen to your podcast, where can they find you?
Well, they can check my website. It's davidrobertsmsw.com. If they can go to my author page, which is psychologyprofessorandminister.com. I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, so they can connect with me there. As far as the podcast, I'm on Apple, Spotify, and other major podcast platforms, including YouTube, so they can subscribe or follow the podcast on any one of those podcast platforms. They can follow me on YouTube if they prefer to watch their podcast. If they want to find out more about the book, purchase the book. They can go to Amazon, and it's under When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister. Um, it's in Kindle and in paperback format, and we've gotten some very, very, really, really great reviews that have really humbled Patty and me, just in terms of what the book has meant to individuals who and professionals who have read it, how it's kind of redefined or given them another way to think about grief. So we've been very pleased, with the progress that we've had, and we just want it to get into the hands of as many people that it can help as possible. So, but yeah, and I'll be willing to sit with anybody on a Zoom call or, if they just need support. I give of my time freely with that. So yeah, so that's how you can get in touch with me, and I'm not hard to find. I'm all over the place. My son calls me the world's oldest millennial, so you'll find me on social media doing all kinds of other stuff, and um, you know, so and that's my story, I think, for now, my year, and then my story continues to evolve every day.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Dave. You're such an inspiration hearing you talk about everything you've been through, all the people you have lost, how you have transformed into this person that you are, and how you have transformed your relationship with the ones you have lost. It's truly remarkable. Thank you so
Well,
much for being here, for opening your heart, for sharing all your experiences and letting us all in with what you have gone through. It was a pleasure to have you here.
it was a pleasure to be here, Mayor. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dave, for opening up your story and your wisdom to us. For anyone who's grieving right now, may this conversation remind you that love doesn't end, it changes form. Be gentle with yourself as you find your own way carrying that love forward. If something from this episode resonated with you, please feel free to like, subscribe, and comment, and share it with others who might see something of value in this episode. This is Grief Talk, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.